Welcome to Game Data. This week we're talking about the most popular video game console of all time, the Nintendo Wii U. Wait, most popular? I think there's a typo in this script.
You wrote the script.
Whatever. It should read one of the most underrated. As of this video, the Wii U stands as the worst-selling Nintendo console of all time, about 8 million units behind the GameCube. Yet, unlike the GameCube, it's still a bit too new to become popular among nostalgic gamers who grew up playing the console. With some time, it'll likely gain some steam, but until then, it's still a large blotch on Nintendo's otherwise stellar record of delivering generation-defining home consoles. But honestly, I think it only has that record because folks never really gave it a fair chance. Although as underpowered as all Nintendo consoles seem to be, it was a very forward-looking device, hindered by a ton of factors both in and outside of Nintendo's control. On the day that this video releases, the Wii U turns 9 years old, and it's more than worthwhile to look back on just how special this console actually was. If you've never actually held or seen a Wii U in person, don't worry, you're not alone. There are only about 13.5 million of us out there who actually purchased one while they were still being sold. That's about 1/9 the number of Wiis that actually made it into households. To get a sense for the console itself though, the base is slightly larger than a standard Wii, or about the size of 3 Blu-ray cases stacked on top of each other. Especially compared to the PS4 and Xbox One, which launched soon after, the Wii is positively tiny. And from personal experience, that's been fantastic for sticking it under TVs or onto small stands. Its form factor also isn't quite as iconic as the GameCube's handle-forward design, but being small enough to be placed anywhere in my living room has always been a huge bonus, and something I wish modern consoles, not named Nintendo Switch, would reconsider. While the worst kind of fingerprint magnet, the glossy plastic case is also pretty slick and comes with a decent amount of I/O. Along with standard Wii cable connections, it has 4 USB-A 2.0 slots, which can be used to plug in peripherals like an Ethernet adapter or external drives for storage. There's also a nifty SD card slot for an extra storage option that doesn't awkwardly stick out of the console. But the downside is that game data can't be saved to the SD card without modifying the system. It's more so there to save screenshots, memes, and other system-related data. All of those extra storage options are really important though, considering the top-tier Deluxe model had a maximum 32 gigabytes of storage. Even in 2012, that wasn't great for a home console, and curiously, it was more in line with smartphones like the iPhone 5, which were still struggling to fit greater amounts of flash memory into their setups. I've always wished that they'd at least included 64 gigabytes with their Deluxe model, and would have probably paid a little bit more for that privilege. But it's actually passable in 2021 when I can buy a few 64 gigabyte flash drives or a larger SSD for relatively cheap. Once formatted, external drives also mount to the system really easily and handle downloads too large for system memory seamlessly. More important than the base station though is the Gamepad. While the base station is small and fades into any entertainment center you sit it on, the Gamepad is much more noticeable in the living room. It's about half the size of the base and much lighter. Right at its center is a 6.2-inch resistive LCD touchscreen, which essentially means it's made more so to be used with the integrated stylus than your fingers. The display itself looks fairly decent for late 2012, and even for 2021, it's not terrible compared to the original Switch, although it's definitely not winning any prizes when pitted against the bright OLEDs common in smartphones these days. Above and below the screen are also 2 very nifty features. On top is a webcam, which does double duty for video chats and a Wii Remote sensor bar when playing Wii games on the Gamepad alone. I've never had the opportunity to test out the video chat feature, but I wouldn't expect it to even have beaten Skype out at the time. The Wii sensor bar, though, is pretty fantastic. While it's not perfect since it only detects a small range of movements, it works especially well for games that don't focus on motion controls, like Pokemon Battle Revolution. Below the screen is a TV button, which, when pressed, pulls up a surprise TV remote. Yeah, part of the Wii U's initial selling point was to be something folks could integrate into their home entertainment centers with ease. If streaming video services like Netflix and Hulu didn't suit your needs, you could still sync the Gamepad with your TV or cable box and use the IR blaster on top to control channels, volumes, and other functions. Best of all this could be done without turning on the base. Even if it seems a bit unwieldy at first, I actually used to use this all the time as my main remote because it was pretty nifty and more straightforward than the remote that came with my Vizio TV. But all of that is secondary, right? How does it actually feel to use for gaming? Beyond the looks, the gamepad controls feel fairly solid overall. I find the Pro Controller-like buttons to be comfortable to hold for even longer periods of time than the internal battery lasts on a full charge. It's around 3 to 4 hours max, by the way. The grips on the gamepad also have a good amount of depth to them to hold onto while playing. Although I've had some friends say that the large width of the gamepad can be a bit awkward during long play sessions, but considering how many people have gotten used to playing their Switches undocked, I have a feeling that fewer people will find it awkward these days. In fact, if Nintendo made a Switch Lite that felt as good to use as the gamepad, I would actually buy that in a heartbeat. If motion controls are more your speed, the gamepad also features an accelerometer to offer more versatile options for games. Similar to the Wii, motion controls proved pretty useful and essential for Wii U games. Few games requested players to move the gamepad as wildly as Wii remotes, but giving the base station the ability to track the gamepad in space allowed for some interesting gameplay experiences. Certain games might require players to use the gamepad as a viewfinder for a camera, for instance, a golf tee, or even the inside of a backpack to manage inventory. And when it comes to games in general, the Wii U is a veritable treasure trove. There are well-known classics like Mario Kart 8, Super Mario 3D World, and Breath of the Wild, as well as lesser-known games like Wonderful 101 and Xenoblade Chronicles X. While many of the console's best games have made their way onto other consoles, none of the ports really capture the experience of playing on a Wii U. Similar to the DS or 3DS, almost all Wii U games have some sort of second screen functionality. For some games, like Wind Waker HD, the second screen is used for basic features like managing inventory or displaying a map. Other games use the gamepad a bit more creatively though, like the motion controls I mentioned, or New Super Mario Bros. U, which uses the gamepad for its boost mode, which means that players can introduce blocks on the screen to either help or hinder the people that they're playing with. The extent to which each game utilizes the gamepad as a unique feature has ultimately determined how well that game translates to another console. Mario Kart 8 did fantastically with its Switch port since it only lost using the second screen as a map. But Nintendo had to cut boost mode entirely from New Super Mario Bros. U for its port since there wasn't a great way to implement it accurately with Joy-Cons alone. Still, I'd argue that even the best port misses some of the flair when it leaves the Wii U. Even if we ignored all the cool custom gameplay the gamepad allowed, having that second screen to store maps, menus, and inventories removed a lot of clutter from the main screen and prevented a lot of unnecessary button presses. Removing those features doesn't really kill a game, but it does remove some ease of access while playing the game. Beyond Wii U games, the Wii U is also the most backwards compatible gaming console in recent history. It supports Wii games out of the box, even going so far as having the traditional Wii menu available to select whenever the console is booted up. When the Wii Shop was still available, games available through the shop could also be purchased and downloaded like any other Wii system. The service unfortunately shut down back in 2019, but it's worthwhile to note as a piece that made the Wii U essentially two systems in one package at launch. While consoles from PlayStation and Microsoft have traditionally offered some sort of backwards compatibility at launch, they've always done so by surfacing older games in their newer stores. For better or for worse, Nintendo decided to have two different stores running at the same time instead. It added a bit of unnecessary complexity overall, but it also made it so that the Wii's lifespan actually lasted a lot longer than expected. GameCube games are also kinda supported, since the Wii U is basically a Wii with upgraded specs. The caveat is that the disk drive doesn't support the GameCube's minidisc format, so a software modification is needed to load games from an SD card. Soft mods for that are well documented and fairly straightforward though, and it makes the Wii U the only real way to output GameCube games from HDMI on Nintendo hardware without an adapter or hardware modification. The one hassle that's a bit more awkward to work around is the lack of GameCube ports. USB peripherals can be found to take care of that though, and using SD cards for game memory is so much better than the original memory cards, which do have a limited lifespan overall. If supporting 3 generations of Nintendo consoles wasn't enough for you, there are also all the virtual console games available through the Wii U eShop. It's not an exhaustive selection, but Nintendo managed to release quite a wide variety of titles to their emulation library during the Wii U's lifespan, plus all the Wii Virtual Console games when that was still available. Games purchasable right now have titles ranging from Game Boy to N64 to DS, and are all fairly cheap, all things considered, usually $10 to $20 USD. If you were put off at all by the subscription-based Switch Online Plus expansion pack, no worries. Most of the games on the surface, right now, can be purchased through the Wii U eShop. You won't get some of the newer, fancier online features from the Switch subscription, but they aren't really necessary anyway. Where the Wii U game library really starts to fall apart is when you delve deeper into its third-party library. Except for the developers with close relationships to Nintendo, like Platinum Games, the Wii U has never really been great for playing games not made by Nintendo. For example, at launch, a handful of third-party games were ported to the system to show off the new HD hardware, but those games had already been out for a while on PC or other consoles. For early adopters, like me, it very quickly raised the question of, should I pay $60 to buy this game on my new console, or buy it for half the price elsewhere? And honestly, I opted to buy the games elsewhere. And that's where the Wii U really fell short, for me at least. I didn't see the value of paying extra for those games in the beginning, and by the time I was in a place where I wouldn't mind paying extra, those types of games weren't even being made anymore for the system. The only games that really kept me playing the console were games made by Nintendo, like Splatoon, Super Smash Bros., or Wind Waker HD. The Wii U also never really took off, and sales quickly stagnated after release. Many consumers seem to have difficulty seeing the point of the Wii U Gamepad, with many writing it off as a gimmick, or not worth their time. Heck, about a week before I bought my Wii U in early 2013, I didn't even understand that it was a new console. I wasn't following game news closely back then, and honestly thought the entire thing was a new tablet accessory for the standard Wii. If it took me a bit of research to get what this console was for, I can't really blame other folks for having their doubts at the time. To add to the issue, the whole structure of the Wii U made cross-development of games difficult. Its ARM-based system was low-powered, even when compared to previous generation consoles like the PS3 and Xbox 360, and meant developers had to be creative if they wanted to port big-budget games for Nintendo's x86-based, vastly more powerful competitors, the PS4 and Xbox One. Looking at the Switch, that likely sounds like a very familiar story, and to Nintendo's credit, they've often created fantastic consoles and handhelds based on hardware that's technically more limited than their competitors. After all, the Wii was severely underpowered, but dug a huge niche for itself, where motion controls weren't terrible and whole households could find something in the console's library to play. However, the problem is that any typical Nintendo problem was compounded by the fact that developers had to figure out what the heck to do with the Gamepad. Developers could support Pro controllers with their games, but some sort of Gamepad feature was almost mandatory for most games. Like with the DS and 3DS before, any use of the Gamepad that felt lazy or phoned in was extremely noticeable and often cumbersome for players. So, not only did any ports need to be heavily optimized for the lower powered system, but they also needed to have unique features only found on the Wii U that wouldn't distract from the overall gameplay or radically change the intended experience. All this is likely why large developers like EA were publicly describing their hesitancy to actually dedicate resources to porting games to the Wii U. And without developer support, fewer games got released for the system, which meant customers had less justification to buy games for the system, which meant fewer developers could justify porting games to the system, which meant fewer people had games to play for the system. And needless to say, this positive feedback loop was disastrous, and the Wii U never actually recovered. By the end of the Wii U's life, the only real reason to buy a Wii U was to play one of the games Nintendo created for their own platform. For any other game, PlayStation and Xbox had the console beat for both pricing and performance. But I wouldn't really call the Wii U a failure. Well, financially, yeah, totally, major failure. Nintendo really suffered through that time, and there were actually huge doubts about them before the Switch launched as to whether they could actually recover. But as a console, the Wii U was actually pretty forward-looking. For all its quirks, it's actually the first widely functional example of game streaming we have. Steam Link wouldn't launch for several years, and while PlayStation Remote Play existed, it was hardly supported on the PS3 and only worked on the PS4 with a PS Vita, whose sales were just as abysmal as the Wii U. Yet, even if we took those later services and placed them in 2012, none of them would have compared to the Wii U's streaming performance. You see, all the different services we have today typically function through a shared connection to local Wi-Fi. To play games without any stutter or lagging, a strong internet connection is needed, which that was fairly hard to come by in the US in 2012, especially for me, a second year at Ohio State, piggybacking off my dorm's congested Wi-Fi connection. Even today, there are plenty of folks in this country who lack fast, stable internet access and might have trouble playing a game over Wi-Fi without rage quitting from technical difficulties. Meanwhile, the Wii U utilizes a modified Wi-Fi protocol that only connects to the Gamepad with the base station, kind of like one of those 2.4 GHz modules used for Bluetooth mice. Without internet access or any kind of special environment, the Gamepad connects seamlessly to a synced base station, and it works just as well today as it did back when it launched, because it's baked into the console itself and doesn't require players to have access to any other resources to utilize properly. It's not a perfect solution, but it does provide a way for anyone to play home console games on a handheld with the base station within its range, roughly 25 feet. And that range is surprisingly decent within a small room or small apartment. In my first apartment, for example, I spent many hours lying in my bedroom playing on the Gamepad streaming from my living room. I spent just as many hours playing Mario Kart on the Gamepad in the living room while my roommate played through Dark Souls for the 50th time on our living room TV. The sheer convenience introduced the first time I was able to play really good looking games on what was essentially a handheld console changed the entirety of what I wanted from a home console. That's not to say I hate playing something like my PS5 on the 65-inch TV sitting in my living room, but game streaming overall has made me less confined to that TV if I want to play games and increase the convenience of accessing my console for admin tasks, like managing downloads or buying a new game. I'm more than sure streaming tech would have advanced as far without the Wii U, but I don't think I would have appreciated having the technology as much if I'd never bought a Wii U in the first place. And for that reason, the Wii U feels particularly special all these years later. To summarize everything, the Wii U launched and immediately had a very rough time. Despite that, the console had a ton of great Nintendo-made games, and its sleek hardware demonstrated how we all might want to play games in the future. It lived and died by its main feature, the Gamepad, and how folks look back on the Wii U will ultimately be determined by how they feel about that Gamepad. After all, at launch, the Switch immediately eclipsed the Wii U in sales, but the Wii U crawled so the Switch could run. In a way, the Switch is basically a Wii U Gamepad if the base station was removed from the equation and a cartridge slot was added to load games. It's the Windows 7 to the Wii U's Windows Vista. Much of the same, but more streamlined, a little more thoughtful, and with branding far removed from the Wii U stigma. In this way, the Gamepad and Wii U continue to live on. And who knows? The rumored 4K Switch might even be something like a base station to enhance the Switch's output. Wouldn't that be funny? So, how do y'all look back on the Wii U? Do you think there's something Nintendo could have done better to salvage the console? Let me know down in the comments. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a huge thumbs up. There are plenty more tech videos coming in the future, as well as reviews for games, both new and old. To watch them as soon as humanly possible, remember to click that subscribe button so that they show up in your feed. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, catch you later.